Tracy is gonna speak first. Writer, photographer, filmmaker Tracy Assing. She works on indigenous culture and has been published in the Trinidad Guardian, Caribbean Review of Books, and Caribbean Beat magazine, where she has also served as a contributing editor. The Amerindians, that you all saw last week, premiered at the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival in 2010 and has enjoyed successful screenings at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and Trinidad's National Academy for Performing Arts, as well as Peter Doyle's Studio Film Club. In October 2011, the film had its North American premiere at the University of Toronto and also enjoyed screenings for Caribbean Studies and Indigenous Studies students at York University, Trent University, and Ontario College of Art and Design. The Amerindians is the first documentary film on Indigenous identity in the Caribbean. And Akuzuru, trained in classical music, steel pan arrangements, classical and contemporary dance, and the performance traditions of Trinidad Carnival, Port of Spain-born Akuzuru has produced, presented, and become known for her multi-genre works, including her many performances and large sculptural installations which have been shown internationally in the Caribbean, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the United States. Akuzuru pioneers the transdisciplinary practice of radical art, which is primarily corporeal-based, using the body as the focal point, canvas, and activator in its presentation. Akuzuru's performances range from spontaneous art, spatial works, experiential art, whether live or on film, and often incorporates the natural world and metaphysics into her process. Akuzuru has lived, studied, and practiced in the UK and Nigeria, undertaking several international art residencies, solo and group shows at various UK, US, and Nigeria-based festivals. She has been the recipient of numerous international awards and has also been an art lecturer in experimental practice at the University of the West Indies since 2000. So those are some long and interesting bios. We're going to start with Tracy Assing, and afterwards we'll have discussion. Yeah? Thank you, Tracy.
So I think most of you would have seen the film last week. Not enough is known about the first Caribbean people, but it most certainly would have been a mix of tribes, much as we are today. Before we were discovered by Columbus, mainland tribes had traveled to these shores and as far as their canoes and courage would take them up the island chain. There were others traveling from the north too, on natural ocean currents and using the trade winds. They were adventurous, curious, and eager to explore, and discovery is still an everyday thing. Until now, Amerindian descendants depended on the stories of their grandparents and great-grandparents for their history, while the indigenous story of survival was never recorded. This unbalanced and often incorrect storytelling that made its way into school textbooks have impacted on generations of indigenous descendants, and the wider community continues to be ignorant of the possibly rich history of the Caribbean islands. In Trinidad, a bear is a carib, and chicken is traded under the Arawak brand. In 1592, nearly a century after Columbus's visit, the Spanish managed to secure their first permanent settlement in Trinidad at the old capital of St. Joseph. Later, Capuchin monks moved in, establishing missions for the conversion of original inhabitants. Those Amerindians who rejected Christianity were severely punished. Faced with a choice between Christianity and death, some of the original inhabitants of the community of Arena, for example, who had not lost their fighting spirit, stood up to the oppressive forces occupying their island in 1699. The resulting conflict would be remembered as the Arena Massacre, but I'm sure that it meant something else to the indigenous people. They murdered the priest, the Spanish governor, and all but one of his men, an action for which naturally they paid dearly. A small number of Spanish settlers did their best to carve out a living in the decades that followed. They never fully occupied the island, which still boasts large areas of virgin rainforest. It's safe to suppose that their census exercises never achieved an accurate account of the island's tribes. Somehow I find it hard to believe the Amerindians were all lining up to be counted by people who had been waging war on them. But it is believed that at least 40,000 inhabited the island in 1592. The Amerindian tribes were referred to by various names, including Taino, Yeo, Napuyo, Chaima, Warao, Kalipuna, Karinipogato, Garini, and Arawaka. We can see where the confusion began. There were many tribes, but now we know only of Caribs and Arawaks. I came to find that some scholars do not believe there was ever a Carib tribe. Carib came from a designation given to those most difficult to control. They were called cannibals, because cannibals are of course wild heathens who could have no claim to land. In 1757, Capuchin monks built a church and established a mission at Arima. It was one of several established by the monks around the island, as the monks believed that converting the natives to Catholicism was one of the key tasks related to conquering the New World. The church was dedicated to the first canonized saint of the New World, Rosa of Lima, Peru, and celebrating the Santa Rosa festival in August was part of the life of the Arima mission. The Feast of St. Rose, which today is celebrated on August 23rd, continues to be celebrated by descendants of the Arima mission, or the Caribs. In 1786, Arima was the last surviving mission town. Amerindians of various missions and various native groups were gathered there to cultivate cocoa and placed under the supervision of a Catholic priest. The baptismal registers at the Santa Rosa Roman Catholic Church show mission residents with Spanish names that have religious associations. So the indigenous were baptized and given the names of saints or other names found in the Bible. Some names were entered with the classification Carib or Indio. In the early decades of the 19th century, the first British governor of Trinidad, Ralph Woodford, made several moves to reserve Arima as a place for the country's Amerindians, going so far as to order non-Amerindians to leave the Arima mission. However, none of his edicts were enforced after his death in 1828. When I was born in 1975, the Santa Rosa Carib community of Arima was a year old, and my great-grandmother Clemencia was one of its founding members. The SRCC, which is sometimes referred to as the Santa Rosa First Peoples Community, was initially registered as a limited liability company led by Ricardo Barra Fernandez. It has played a key role in keeping some elements of Trinidad's indigenous culture alive. Members conduct regular workshops on basket weaving and roof patching and the preparation of traditional foods, which they also trade: cassava bread, cassava farine, and cassari. The center at Paul Mitchell Street in Arima has often hosted students and researchers who are interested in the medicinal uses of plants and herbs and aspects of indigenous life that are still being practiced. The Santa Rosa Festival was established as part of the organization of the Arima Mission and is now a signature marker of Amerindian survival. Yet it isn't all there is to the indigenous population of this country. The celebration is a symbol of victory as much as it is one of defeat. It has played its role in keeping something of a tradition alive in the indigenous community, but cannot wholly define how descendants of Amerindians define themselves today. I was an active participant in the Santa Rosa Festival for 8 years and have remained a member of the community of Amerindian descendants that live in Trinidad and Tobago. The former Carib Queen, Valentina Medina, was my great aunt, and in my documentary film, The Amerindians, I interview her about her role in the community and succession plans. I still recall a childhood spent in awe of the celebration of Santa Rosa. Come rain or shine, until the age of 8, I took part in the pantomime. I joined the young girls dressed from head to toe in pink, special dresses and ribbons, gleaming white shoes, uniform lines, and hundreds of tiny woven cane baskets filled with the petals of red and pink flowers. Hibiscus and rose carefully dropped in the street to create a carpet, the way led by a priest. As it was in the beginning, so it ends in front of the church. So conquered that the only thing left to celebrate, to call our own, the thing we were recognized for, was this festival in honor of a Catholic goddess. The establishment of reservations, and particularly the Arima mission, which was an amalgamation of missions, led to the systematic erosion of a specific Amerindian identity, presence, and culture. This shaped contemporary understandings of Amerindians as both present in and absent from the larger nation, and can be seen in the lack of even a census category for indigenous persons. On May 19th, in 1990, the government of Trinidad and Tobago officially recognized the SRCC as the sole legitimate representative of Trinidad's retained community of Amerindians. In 2007, an Amerindian project committee was appointed to advise the government about the development of the community. The work of the Amerindian Project Committee has also resulted in the establishment of a Day of Recognition, which takes place each year on October 14th. Bharat Hernandez continues to run the SRCC, although membership has dwindled over the years, leaving a core group of just about 200 men and women. The average age of the group is 60. The current Carib Queen is Jennifer Piles Kassar. She was elected in 2011. The community has been largely dependent on the state and private contributions for funding, but Bharat Hernandez has lobbied successful governments for land for the community with the intention of constructing a model village, a botanical park, and setting up a cassava processing industry and creating a research and documentation center. What is clear is that the story of Amerindians in this country is not one of decimation, but one of survival. We survive in the names of rivers, mountains, and places like Kumaka, Mukarapo, Aripo, Kora, Paria, Takarib, Tamana, Chupara, Madamas, Aruka, Naparima, Toko, Piarco, and Platanal. We gave you the hammock and the barbecue. When I started living and working in Port of Spain, I was once asked, how do you know you're indigenous? My father always told my brother and I that we never had to prove who we were, and the answer to the question wasn't just my family history, but our way of life and our attachment to the forest. As a journalist and writer, I have told this story at every opportunity. Though I tell other stories, I always felt that this was the most important one. And when it came to the Amerindians, I thought this was another way to tell the story, or to share it with more people. This is how we should be recognized. It wasn't about a personal fulfillment gained by my own exploration of my identity, but I wanted the generations to come in my community to have a document to reference, where documentation was so absent before. Dr. Basil Reed in the Department of Archaeology and Maximilian Forte, who lectures in anthropology in Canada, have been great allies on my personal journey. While Max's work has taken him to many other areas, his book, ruins of absence, presence of Caribs, was a landmark text in the story of Amerindian identity on this island. Dr. Reed spreads himself thin to find the time to continue valuable research here at UWI. In September last year, he shared some important findings on the presence of maize, sweet potato, and chili pepper, taking the timeline of habitation on these islands even further back than previously thought. This work is fundamental to the Caribbean story, Caribbean history, and identity. Exploring who we are and how we survived could be important to our continued survival in these isles. Thank you.
Now I'll invite Akuzuru to address you.
You all would have received the title of I titled my talk because I felt it was a nice way of me investigating myself and why I do what I do. And this is the reason why I accepted to do this, because it falls in quite neatly with my creative practice as an artist. So the geographical praxis in performance arts, inquiry of body mappings in engaged spaces. All right? And I believe you all have a certain question that I have submitted, for your consideration. But we'll get to that a little later. And then, to ground zero, we look at silence, emptiness, and nothingness. Is a good way to start your life, a good way to start your day. This is how you started when you were all just fetus in your mama's belly. Silence, emptiness, and nothingness is a good place to be and a good place to start. This is Trinidad and Tobago, and we are all junglings of this jungle in the Caribbean space, in this world and universe. What does this mean, and why do we need to map? I call myself a transdisciplinary artist with an emphasis on performance art. Within the politics of space, I will expand on the transdisciplinary practice a little later. Within the politics of space, I am not a political artist, although art in itself can get absorbed into the political strata via calculated or deliberate interventions from those who want to read politicality into the work. Politics itself, as an entity, is essentially a spatial hierarchical establishment, which I have recognized as deeply emotive and fraught with attachment and ego. When an artist pronounces or announces expression within that spatial framework without the intention of being political in the approach, the work as it may be perceived can inadvertently become political. My main concern here is for humanity to attain its highest level of potential in existence, looking at the universal circumstances of human life. This is my metaphysical approach. What is the purpose of art? Art is meant to challenge, disturb, discomfort, provoke, shock, and realign your axis. By nature, it is confrontational because it is a spatial enterprise. Your worst fears may be realized upon engaging an artwork or the most memorable encounter in your life. Such is the power of art. Expect the unexpected. My work is a beacon, a force that ignites and engineers the inner worlds of the individual. This is a monumental undertaking on a global scale. The Caribbean, though a micro-reality, is of the macrocosmic topographical entity known as Earth. But still, this is a micro-reality because the outer verses are trans-macrocosmic as long as there is continuum. Process is an intense dedication, and this is something that I always bring up with my art students when I was teaching at the Visual Arts Department that they must respect process. It is an intense dedication, and expect the unexpected, I always say, during my performance, during the process. Not the piece of paper or the end product that you look forward to. The process must be allowed to express itself through vigorous honesty and committed applied vision. This is where innovation goes beyond the liminal, where purity results from the unfettered process. Now, what is performance art? Performance art is radical, confrontational, durational, deeply emotive, encompassing several genres. It is an endurance practice, a postulation that presents a challenge to the corporeal, meaning the body, of course, in constructed situations. It is said that music is the highest art form using sound vibration, and it is totally immaterial as an art form. But I posit that performance, which by its very nature is a total art form, is also a deeply vibrational art, both sonic and ethereal, where the engagement of it is emotive and can alter the consciousness, and is essentially non-material. Performance in art, in my expression of it, reinforces the presences of the other body form or matter, because my premise lay in building a bridge between the two energy forces, one unseen. It is the bridge between the material body and the ethereal body. Expect the unexpected is a catchphrase, a sort of warning which I apply to myself and the attending public. The reaction to the work is also a critical spatial component which further ignites a dialogue, establishing several activities in the process. People's reactions become an integral part of the process. I absorb the reactions, however violent or passive, as part of the dialogue. Expect the unexpected can also be imposed on an unsuspecting public by the artist. A performance can also be experienced as an attempt to break a bodily or thinking routine by shifting rhythmic expectations, by presenting an obstruction or obstructions in a very public setting, and how the receptor handles this imposition, this thing in the way. So both the body and mind are engaged in this challenge. So looking at body mappings, clothing design, this is something that which I call clothing construction, because I do design clothing. And the action of cutting as intrinsic to learning the anatomy of the body and its mappings. Pattern making as a form of body mapping, the landscape as a geographical approach in this practice. This was a lead up to performance art as practice where documenting the environment of life is an intense challenge on the function of the corporeal. Body mappings as a parallel to geographical mappings as a corporeal enterprise. Remapping of self-metaphysics in the embodiment of space as an extension of self via interstitial and macro spaces. Engage in the interstitial, the interstellar, and the intergalactic as expansive spatial possibilities. The appropriated space extending into the natural environment where infinite possibilities abound are intrinsic to the creative process, a topographical engagement, both chilling and intimidating in its polydiatribe. Therefore, any additional labeling entraps the integrity of the work. For instance, my ethology project, global in scale and initiated in India, this was back in 2008. Has come out of these investigations. The project looked at 3 varying spaces as a spatial work in 3 acts. The enclosed gallery space, the immediate controlled outdoor environment, and finally, the vast natural and spoiled environment where Vastness was a key component in the process and end result in the engagement of the work itself. Although undertaken in India as a global project, it would be interesting to see how this is expressed in the Caribbean landscape, and this meaning the Anthology Project. Geographical praxis in my work process. What is geography and its connection to anthropology and artistic practice in the Caribbean and developing identity? Geography expanding identity, starting with the 10,000-year-old Banwari man, I should say. This is my thesis in indigenizing expression through the research of the history of gesture in the indigenizing process. Geography and landmass is integral to the engaged experience of a work on location. All the connecting landscape is the work itself. Indigenizing, also engaging those various energy centers in the local landscape. For instance, the mud volcanoes area, the river swamps, the Waro, press box, etc., as an acknowledgement of historical indigenous engagement of the environments in the local topography which have shaped the law of the people, inclusive of the peoples of the old cultures of the Aboriginal, the African, the Indian, the Chinese. This expands on my transdisciplinary praxis. The embodiment of space and an empirical approach in my geopraxis formulates a personal lexicon. For instance, my Magwayapa forms, let me repeat that, my Magwayapa forms as an integral and central presence in my installations over the years. Through language, and if one were to insert a linguistic anthropological approach here, the Magwayapa was formed by merging Mama, Guayguayari, and Gayap to create an indigenized presence as a Caribbean presence. The Magwayapa is the new Caribbean as art in geography in my performative discourse. The geographical praxis is my transdisciplinary praxis. Let me expand a little bit on the Magwayapa so you get a little more understanding of it. The Magwayapas are intuitive performance sculptures. This coinage is a culmination of several years of production of an organically strategic mechanism. A mechanism which utilizes the corporeal for the sculpturing possibilities of movement, whether performative in actual physicality or implied movement through stasis, even though imbued with an intellectualism and multi-layered narrative. The emphasis here lay in the perpetual investigations and explorations of form. This is its orientation. So the artist, through continued temporal processes, a superstructural apotheosis, has come upon the designation Magwayapa. This monument is hinged on a connected field of situations which emanated from the artist's original birth nation, Trinidad, in the world space as an integral part of the context. These situations are Ma, as in mother, Mas, as in masquerade, Guayguayari, which is the East Coast location in Trinidad of Amerindian, firstly populated by Amerindian peoples here, and Gayap, which is a gathering. So in connecting these links, clothe and activate the performer, converging all of these, thus transformed, becoming an extension of myself, metamorphosed into another life form. So the Magwayapa, in a composed situation as a spatial work, is presented as a sculptural performance entity. Therefore, the Magwayapa accentuates a series of works within the framework of the artist's experiential art establishment, within the framework of the spatial works epics. So they are really sensorial pieces that are often part of an ongoing epic or series of works, informed by interdisciplinary expressions in which hyperrealism may become intrinsic to their perception. So my personalized coinage, experiential art, have come about from my many long walking hours on the earth in different environments in the world. Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, North America, and Europe. As a walker, I have come to the realization that direct experiences of very visceral situations or circumstances become indelible in the mind, and these activate an energy process which becomes intrinsic to the strategic vision of my practice. This is an empirical series of research in the human condition as it relates to the environment. Also, the vastness of space and landscape has become an intrinsic spatial component in the absorption of the work and its location. So by acknowledging topographical and oceanic spatial vastness as an integral component, one recognizes time, transience, and space as both surreal and hyperreal elements that consume the work. So this is the life and the process of body mappings. But also vital to this contemplation and application of expression in this vastness is that interstitial spaces in nature are very critical in ego expression, inclusive of live animals, insects, even wind, to activate energy vibrations in the natural world. These are also identity builders. Therefore, my spatial works, essentially environmental and metaphysical, looking at performance as location, as traveling, traversing through spaces. The geographic landscape of my transdisciplinary practice are realized through performance art expression through life procession, sculptural installations, musical constructions, photo compositions, tableau vivant compositions, experimental video and film, esoteric writings and concept clothing within the framework of experiential art. Very physically intense experiences and interactive in their presentations, akin to cinematic production, which is on its own a multidisciplinary landscape, a total art experience, very visceral superstructural odyssey, multi-site, locational, transient, and ephemeral. These presentations demand the physiological engagement of the gaze, where indelibility plays a crucial role here through hyper-realistic transformations. But what is important too is that, for me, trees in their significance in my work have played a very intrinsic role in the process. They are the Earth's sentinels and have incorporated the majestic presence of various arboreal sentinels, which have deep spiritual significance in surrounding communities. One has come to the realization that trees are important in establishing identity. When this is transposed to the Trinidad Caribbean landscape, the same can be said here, given the historical and spiritual significance of the giant silk cotton trees located in various communities. So my mission really is to bring back the balance. Okay, so my upcoming projects include establishing a foundation, which is a support for my artist blueprint to consolidate the many years of practice. I'm working on a performance art symposium in the Caribbean, various collaborations. The Earthology project is ongoing, and there are various other presentations coming up. But I hope you were able to look at the question that I submitted. What is your personal geography? Geography, although a study of the lands, its inhabitants, and symbiotic relationship in harmony with the planet Earth. This can also expand to the total study of the universe itself. But the geography starts with you, the individual. It is essentially about the dynamics of space. Right now, we exist in an interstitial space, part of a macro scheme of interspatial and multidimensional realities. A fallen tree across the road can effectively change that dynamic. This is about how we engage the space as presented to us. other disturbances in perceived space, like storms, hurricanes, the fallen trees, the traffic jams, buildings, and other forms of temporary and permanent appropriations. These are identity related. Also simpler gestures, holding hands, crowds walking in various directions, or an individual walking or running, burning a forest, etc. These disturbances can be destructive and or constructive to the spatial dynamic. Also another question to look at, another consideration, carnival inflections as geography within the monumentality of its superstructural spatial interventions. How this manifests in the politics of performance, art, and identity in the Caribbean space, and the global platform impactfully as an influential pivot in the discourse of art and history. All right, so that is pretty much my brief talk. I have a few images that I want to share with you. All right, so this first one here, this is a performance work. This was done in 2010 in Woodbrook, in Trinidad and Port of Spain, at Ghisyawan. This is called Vein. And here I engaged, it was quite a very wet night. It was very interesting when it was raining. The actions of the water was a very interesting, added a very interesting dynamic to the whole ambience of the event itself. And became also very important as something to absorb into the work. So people were actually in the rain engaging this work. And I had 10 co-performers. Which one do I press? N? This is my ethology project, which was initiated in India in 2008. This is a performance, live performance, and photo composition. I'd rather have a bit of light here, actually.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. I actually worked with 2 sex workers in this particular piece, or we might call prostitutes. But it's actually a healing chamber that I created to take the women away from such a rigorous way of life. It is a way of life in many parts of the world. And I actually work with an organization who protects them. And so I managed to have a meeting and meet these 2 wonderful women who wanted to engage in something like this. So this was a vast, beautiful landscape in the outskirts of Bangalore in the countryside, littered with huge boulders. And I wanted to do this amazing experience for them. So this is one piece here, and this is also another part of the ethology project in India. This was in Delhi now, where I had a sculptural installation on a silk cotton tree which blossomed at the end of when the installation was finished. Then the tree just blossomed all these beautiful red flowers. So it's interesting how nature interacts, organically into the work. Life goes on. So that was ethology. This is my love series called Una. This is in Trinidad, in Port of Spain. And this is something, the love series is something that is also an ongoing series. I wanted to emphasize in the craziness of what is happening in the world. My thing is love reigns supreme, and this is something that this is a message that I wanted to spread. That you really have to, when you recognize and absorb what love truly means, we can engage and encourage peaceful interliving amongst ourselves and with other beings. So this is not utopia, this is for me the reality. And then I talk about these obstructions and discomforts. here I am here at Queen's Hall in Port of Spain. This is called germination. And I use a prosthetic that makes me look like a 10-month pregnant lady. And I was actually lying at the entrance. This is at the Coco Dance Festival actually, and I was lying at the entrance into the building itself. And I deliberately wanted to obstruct people as they walked in, so they had to either step over me or around me, so just to disrupt, people's normal way of engaging the space. And seeing somebody looking sort of like a vagrant but very pregnant lady, people look and they think she needs to go to the hospital. What's happening with this person? Various things, but. And it was raining that night too. There's something about the rain that appears whenever I'm doing a performance. I like that actually. This is in Martinique.
Okay.
That's me underneath all of that, believe it or not. And this is actually a it's a ruin of an old plantation where they made the distilled rum, something like this. Yeah, an old rum distillery. And what I wanted to do was reenact an old person who may have worked on this plantation, an old African person. And this is what happened here. Actually, there was an installation of a beaver house on this as part of the work, where I transformed into someone in white at the end of it and ended up in a coffin-like structure on the estate itself. But it also had a running river next to it, which I also used as part of the film. There was an actual video of this actual performance, and the water part was part of the actual film itself. Transporter will be sent 2007 Martinique. This is 2006 Port of Spain, Queen's Park, Savannah. This work is called Atonement for Our Transgressions. It's an installation of bamboo poles with used clothing that I got from various sources around. And what was interesting, and this is meant to be a kind of a board, and at the same time representative of human forms, of spirits. And I wanted to use that as an engaged energy center as well in Port of Spain. And what was interesting about this installation is that after having done that, the next day there was a fairly powerful earthquake, and then the next day as well it was brought down by people to this day who I have no idea who might have brought it down. It was actually destroyed. I put it back up with the help of a colleague. They brought it down again, then burnt everything. And then I put it back up burnt. So what I liked about it, it was quite unexpected again. Like I said, expect the unexpected. Because you never know what kind of reaction you may get to your work. So you absorb it. So these are the kinds of things you go through as an artist at times. This is Tapia Flood 2. This is at CCA 7. This was an important Caribbean art space in the Fernandez complex in Nauvoo. And this was a solo show I did there. It actually had two components. There was a botanical gardens component, and then you had the indoor installation. And I will just say that with this piece, I'll just say a little something that I had explored architectural tenets with regard to dwellings and the reconnecting to nature through the use of natural materials and sensitizing people's thinking and citing art. That's S and then C, citing art, now a space of everyday living. I had designed and produced new urban dwellings with a sense of the rural in the installed setting. These transmigrations allude to a connecting global phenomenon where an upheaval of roots and transporting this to another space for varied reasons connote an instability in the resettling of one's psychological and physical reality. The juxtapositioning of dwelling and non-dwelling is an engagement of forced transmigrations and settlement. The concept of the clothesline as a point of reference, which is what I'm doing here, and as a sculptural investigative aesthetic, is explored here because it is a common part of our local dwelling experience. The performance of it, albeit domestic, is very much the vernacular of this time and space. The clothesline is a symbolic umbilical cord which emanates from the mother called synesthesia. And this work really is it's a continued narrative hinged on domesticity and transmigration. It's autobiographical, and looked at the role of the female. And I talked about Maguayapas, and here is an example of several of Maguayapas, even though I usually have one overlooking an entire installation, but here is an example where I have several of them as monuments in their own right. So this looked at the role of the female, the mother, in my domestic and spiritual reality. And as a result, people who came, members were jolted, saying that the works reminded them of their ancestors and grandmothers. So these works touched people dearly. So this is Mama. So this piece was called Ma Mother, right? And this is Mama Bois, made from burlap and various ropes. And another example here is Mama Dieu, which is Mother God. Okay, and this was back in 2007. And that's it. That's my talk.